Hello, thanks for stopping by. Today I will try to answer which war Germany had the best chance to win. To help us answer this question, we must look at what years the window of victory was open. That is 1914, 1918, 1939, and 1941. These years the positions are similar. Where Germany is attacking a major European power from a position of equal or greater military strength, supported by a relatively untouched industry. These years are so important because this is make it or break it, there is no turning back. A victorious campaign is needed in a timeline of months. Because if they don't, they would be forced into a stalemate, resulting in a slow defeat because Allied industry, resource access, and manpower were large enough advantages to win. There are a couple important factors to touch on before we look at the 4 years. Technology was a net plus for the Germans. Why? Just imagine starting an offensive war without tanks and planes. All there is to be relied on is mass infantry charges supported by artillery. It does the job, but think how much casualties and time that takes. No tanks or planes also lead to less encirclements, so there is less snowball potential. The World War I counterparts of these machines did prove useful but came around the halfway through the war, which has its setbacks, such as meeting combat problems for the first time, etc. Another factor to note is logistics. It will always be a problem. But was it a bigger problem in World War I or II? To answer this, we need to ask ourselves, what do planes, tanks alongside already the existing trucks and trains use to run? It's oil. The World War II strain on oil leaked into repercussions in combat more often. That isn't to say oil in the First World War was desirable. The Germans would like the Ottomans to take the oil-rich city of Baku. But it was out of reach for a long time. In 1914 the Central Powers were in a two-front war. In the west is the UK and France. In the east is a stronger Russia than planned for, as they began to mobilize due to diplomatic tensions before the war. All that really matters though is knocking France out. With infantry charges and artillery spam, Germany attacks Belgium to avoid the fort defenses of the Maginot Line, and to widen the front. UK would join because they guaranteed Belgium. The Germans push further into France, close to Paris, but are defeated at the Battle of the Marne, which is the beginnings of a stalemate. So the Germans rush to the sea to outflank the French and British. This would ultimately fail, resulting in a complete trench war stalemate to the end of the war. Say this was a simulation and we could run this 1914 Western Front scenario 100 times. How many would result in a Central Powers victory? Tell me what you think. In my opinion it would be around 35 times. Let's skip to the start date of World War II, 1939. The Third Reich was in a two-front war, yes, however seemingly in a better spot. Poland on the east was an easier enemy to defeat, and even their neighbor the USSR plans to pitch in their defeat. Which is mean, but if you want land, what can you do? So fast forward to the Western Front. With planes and tanks the ability to smash through the Western Allies' lines was much greater, which would ultimately allow the Third Reich to encircle large quantities of the Allies. That makes the Germans win. On the surface it does seem like a win. But in the lead up to the war the main Axis powers made increasingly more infamous land grabs, creating a backlash in United Kingdom politics. So their new PM Winston Churchill stays in the war, resulting in the chances of complete victory to be technically zero. The approach to eventually get victory over the UK is to win the air fight and gobble up their colonies. This approach is unrealistic if you put it into perspective of what the Nazis are and their plans. Not to mention food shortages and oil problems. So I actually changed my mind just now. The German chances are in limbo. 1918 was quite a roller coaster of emotions for all those involved. Russia collapsed into revolution. Germany was in the process of negotiating a very favorable peace with the Bolsheviks, where they released former countries within Russia. This peace allowed for soldiers and supplies to go west, creating a second wind effect for the German Empire. In the meantime, the Western Allies were being reinforced by the United States. Meaning it was again up to Germany's final 100-day offensive to decide their victory or defeat. On August 8, 1918 it began. Only problem was, they were forced to run into layers of trenches with machine guns. Throwing enough men into the meat grinder eventually will work, but at what cost? There will be another layer of reserve trenches and fresh enemy reinforcements on the way. So the attacks succeeded at first, but got progressively weaker to the point these attacks were unsustainable. Once this defeat was apparent, there was a ceasefire, then the Germans surrendered on November 11, 1918. This time I think the chance of a victory was 15%. Mind you, I am not wargaming each key battle that was had. I have looked at the Nazi Germany's 1941 position. And with hindsight of the USSR marching into Berlin 4 years later, it's hard to conceptualize the Third Reich winning on the Eastern Front. However, the Nazis in 41 were generally confident. This is because Stalin purged his army in 1936 to 1938. Stalin's army was tested in the war with Finland in 1939, where they underperformed. So anyways, in 1941 the Germans went in, with stunning encirclements. They pushed deep into the USSR. On the map their gains were impressive. However, it wasn't what they were aiming for. German logisticians wanted this campaign to win within the later half of the year. And it just wasn't happening. Soviet forces stiffened. And Soviets also did scorched earth policy to increase the drain on German logistics. When the Germans were consolidating, the Soviets went on an unfruitful offensive in the winter of 41. But just the fact the Soviets did this showed their ability to stay in the fight. Now, the thing is, realistically victory was still possible in 1942, so I will cover that year too. In this year German plans were motivated by oil. So they went for the Caucasus. Within this offensive they invaded Stalingrad as a kind of shield for the south of resources. The forces got bogged down and got encircled by the Soviets in Operation Uranus. Worse yet, Germans did not get a significant amount of oil from their occupation in the Caucasus to the best of my knowledge. The war would go on for another 3 years, but by then Germany was destined to be mostly on the defense for the rest of the war. What were the chances of the German war machine to defeat the USSR? I feel like it should be low, despite the early success. In closing, I think World War I Germany had the better chance to win compared to its more rabid ideological counterpart.